everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Angler's Prescription. Tonight we got a good one. We're joined by a man that has come out of the gate on fire, and he may or may not be flexing his muscle tonight, although he's been doing lately. But let's bring in this ragtag bunch of these guys that you know and love. Good morning, John.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, James.
What's up, buddy?
What's up?
And Shane, good afternoon, sir.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, and John, congrats, man, on this last weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that next week. Next week, we are going to be joined by not only a one-time winner at New Maloney's, but a two-time winner in 2 weeks at New Maloney's, Mr. Damien Tao. He'll be in with us next week, but tonight, a couple things. We will be doing a Yak Attack giveaway sponsored by Headwaters. It's a Omega rod holder. So if you want to be a part of that, watch till the end and we'll figure out how we're going to give it away.
Or the middle. Or the middle. Somewhere during the day.
Just figure it out. We'll announce when we do the giveaway.
Yeah, have it a surprise so that way they don't sign in at the end.
Yeah. Well, they don't know when the end's going to be, John. It could be an hour. It could be 30 minutes. They don't know.
Right.
So, hey, guys, anyway, don't forget to check out Headwaters. Don't forget to go to Headwaters on your way to Trinity this weekend. So if you have not done so, sign up for the BAM Kayak Tournament Trail Series on Lake Trinity. How much are you looking for this one, John?
Oh, man, it's going to be a blast. It's like Clear Lake, but it has small mouth, large mouth.
What's your prediction?
All biggins. Oh, how many inches? 96, 97, something like that.
Yeah, 95 to 100 is my guess.
What'd you catch? What'd you catch last year, John? 94? That Saturday, right? 94, 95?
Yeah, 94 and a half or something like that, yeah. I could have had a lot more than that, too. I could have got them all on the boat.
I think the year before with the Pro Tour I can't remember what it was. It was 90-something a day. That was over 2 days. So, yeah, I think it's going to be 94, 96, somewhere around there.
It's going to be fun.
One. Oh, yeah.
It's going to be fun.
And it's followed up by the following weekend at Clear Lake. So you have potential to crack 2 100-inch bags in 2 consecutive weekends. So
at 2 phenomenal lakes.
2 extremely phenomenal lakes.
Yeah.
So don't forget about that.
Most anticipated lakes of the year.
That's right. And one other thing of business I want to get to, don't forget about this. If you'll show it. There we go. Hookforlife.com, Hook44, all capitals. Save 10% on your order, free shipping over $50. Show Jay some love down there, over there in Ione. I went and saw him today. He's doing good. Shop looks good. So, yeah, if you're going to Comanche, Amador, Hogan, unfortunately, guys, Pardee is closed for the season.
Man, what a slap in the face that was.
Oh, dude, that's a killer. That just sucks.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, any of those other lakes down there, maybe you just want to stop by, talk to Jay, talk about fishing.
By the way, I told Jay to get duplicate of everything you bought today.
That's a bunch of Kitex, bro. And a 9-inch Nessie.
Nice.
So I need another one.
That's what she said.
Hi-oh. Anyway, guys, we're done with this. Don't forget Hook44, hooked number 4, life.com. Let's bring in this guy. See how he's flexing this. There we go. What's up, Colby?
What's up, guys?
How you doing tonight, sir?
Doing great.
Thanks for joining
That's
us.
awesome. Thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah.
And I gotta say it again, man. Those trophies look bigger than you. My goodness.
30 pounders, man.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
So you won 2 tournaments. The only 2 BAM have had so far this year, or have they had 3?
The Pro Tour, the first 2.
Yeah, so these are the only 2 trophies from the BAM Pro Tour so far. So I got one from Lake Martinez, which is this one. and then one from Lake Almanor, that guy there. So back-to-back events. Super fortunate to have been able to bag both of those. First 2 Pro Tour events for BAM.
And you live in Oregon, right?
Yeah, I live in Southern Oregon.
So
Oregon kid.
You drove how many hours to get to? Let's see, Almanor would probably be the closer than Martinez, huh?
Yeah, Almanor's 4 hours, 4.5 hours from my house. And Martinez, man, I think it took us 16 or 17 hours to get there.
Wow.
So long haul there.
That's a real long haul. That's a lot of fuel right there.
Yeah, I think it was. I want to say it was close to $1,000 each way.
Wow.
in the
Yeah,
I was running. So
for sure. Well, at least you made it up on both those winnings.
yeah, true that.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome.
Houdini's back.
No, sorry, I got dogs I'm dealing with. Anyway, yeah, congrats, Colby. Let's see. So Santa Margarita, you've never fished it before. There is no practice for that. It's the Martinez. What else? Margarita's the one down by whatever, Paso or whatever that is.
So what's the next one you're gonna win, Colby?
Hey, John.
Oh, okay.
It's my turn. Anyway, so a new lake. You haven't fished it before. You have no pre-fish. It's 30 days off limits. No info sharing, I'd imagine, in those off limits times. How'd you approach going down there? What'd you do? What's your map study? Did you do what your YouTube looking at? What'd you do to prep yourself to go down there?
Yeah, so Lake Martinez is outside Yuma, Arizona. It's kind of like a section on the lower Colorado River. So if you take Lake Havasu and then you keep driving a couple hours south, that's approximately where Lake Martinez is. Pretty big section of river. I think it really encompasses like 70 navigable miles between kind of some little dams. And what it entails is actually the lake itself, Lake Martinez. There's also Ferguson Lake and a multitude of backwaters. We're talking a dozen or more, maybe 24 different backwaters. Some of them are the size of like a 10-acre pond. Other ones are probably 700 or 800 acres. So when I was doing map study, I really tried to get a lot of different angles and investigate the fishery and how it kind of set up. Obviously, the main current of the Colorado is a factor I wanted to consider. Upon doing some research, I concluded that there wasn't much smallmouth down there. So I kind of ruled out the main current in the Colorado that far south and switched my gears to like solely focus on largemouth. I read different articles and whatever fishing reports I could find, and then definitely watch some YouTube videos to see about how the fishery looked and how it's set up. And Martinez in that area is a really core largemouth fishery. So there's a lot of overhanging willows, tule points. There's some grass. There's a lot of timber actually, like mesquite trees and things that had been flooded. So there's definitely a lot of cover and structure down there that looks really juicy for largemouth. Once I kind of understood how the fishery set up, how to kind of navigate it, at least from a topographical perspective, I started to look into some different tactics and things in different areas. Coming from Oregon, a long ways from Arizona, and I'm not like a really strong, like a Delta guy or backwater guy or anything like that. I wouldn't call myself that, at least. I wanted to pick an area that was consumable, but also large enough that it could occupy a couple days of fishing. So I chose Ferguson Lake. From what I understood, at least from my research, Ferguson had access to some deeper water. We're talking 8 to 12 feet, which down there is really deep. The river itself and a lot of those backwaters are 1 or 2 or 3 feet deep. So I wasn't confident, immediately running into an area that was so shallow. I wanted to fish a lake situation more so. The other things I started to understand about Ferguson were that it had likely resident populations of baitfish as well as obviously largemouth bass. So I'm under the impression that the larger lakes down there that are connected to the Colorado, Ferguson, I think there's one called Imperial, and Lake Martinez, all would have access to threadfin shad. There's probably some gizzard shad that use that area. There's presence of carp, so you have baby carp. I caught some crappie down there when I was down there, and I'm sure there's different types of panfish and things like that as well. So really what I did is I looked at, satellite images, topographical maps, things of that nature to find areas that maybe seemed conducive to my style. I saw some videos and got some ideas, premonitions in terms of lures that I could apply. And then I went into that area and I made that area work for 2 days. The first day I was able to catch 16 or so scoreable fish, and I had a nice bag. I think I had 18 pounds or something. I knew that I put a hurting on my fish that I had ended up finding because they were generally fry garters. So I couldn't necessarily see them, but I would see the fry kind of scattering things. So having caught 16 fish that were kind of a measurable resource that I knew was diminishing, going into day 2, I was a little bit hesitant or a little bit worried rather, because I knew that I caught the brunt of those fish. That being said, with the format that we fish, I wanted to capitalize on those bites on the first day, regardless of if I didn't have enough to carry me through maybe into a big limit on the second day, because I was really aggressively chasing the scoreable fish. So it ended up working out really good down there in that aspect. But that's generally how I approach researching the fishery. I look for a bigger, more but consumable patch of water. It was about 700 acres or something like that, and then kind of just went from there.
Nice. And then Almanor, you've got a little bit of time there.
Yeah, so the first time that we fished, I
was the
fished
last
Almanor
time?
rather, was in a pro tour event with a different organization. And that was, I think, back in 2021. And it was in the early spring. So I fished it then. I think I fished it one more tournament last year in May. So I had a little bit of experience down there in the springtime, some familiarity. And I always felt like I could be successful at Almanor. There was just some hurdles I had to jump in order to kind of better understand the fishery. I went down and pre-practiced and spent a little bit of time, before the off limits, kind of getting a little bit more familiar with the fishery and more so the fish. I kind of pride myself in being a smallmouth fisherman. I love smallmouth. From Southern Oregon, like that is literally my bread and butter. I've spent more time in my life chasing big smallmouth than any other type of bass. So I always feel confident when I get to fish for them in a tournament setting, although Almanor does have some different situations that make them a little bit more nuanced than other smallmouth that are kind of honestly a little bit more predictable, at least for me.
So,
and what was that?
Yeah, so at Almanor, the nuances that really control those smallmouth, I'd say more so hinge on bait and how the fishery sets up. So it's kind of a unique setup at Almanor. It's a reservoir, so it has a dam, but it really sets up similar to a natural lake in the aspect of it's kind of like a giant bowl. You don't have a lot of arms and stuff. There's a couple tributaries, but not that many. So comparing it topographically to a fishery like Shasta that's really developed and has arms and creeks and humps and ridges and everything and miles and all these crazy shapes of cover, and rather structure. You go to Almanor and it's kind of just like one giant basin with kind of like one main lake point type deal. So it's an interesting setup in that aspect just in and of itself.
Sure.
To further complicate that fishery, 360 degrees around the fishery is prime smallmouth habitat. Most of the banks on Almanor are relatively slow tapering. There's a huge amount of stumps, isolated boulders, rough patches. There's docks, there's buoys with big concrete slabs holding them down, right? So in terms of designing the ultimate, smallmouth habitat, it's ideal. So the amount of water to consume is kind of hard to break down because it's all good. It really is all good. 360 degrees around Lake Almanor is epic smallmouth cover and structure. Yeah. So, and then furthermore, their primary forage, at least from what I've been able to analyze, is definitely pond smelt. And similar to fisheries that hinge on like kokanee, alewives, cisco, and pond smelt, I'd say those 4 bait fish completely recompose the fish's nature, right? So if they're eating shad, like bass fishermen know how to chase shad eaters. If they're eating Cisco, we know where to go target them for that. But I think the differences with the kokanee, pond smelt, alewives, cisco is they're more of like a mid-water column fish that feeds on microorganisms and algae in the water. So where they position themselves is almost more circumstantial, where not that shad don't do that, because they do, but they're more predictable. You know what I mean? These other fish, maybe it's me not being as familiar, but I spend a lot of time fishing for fish that eat kokanee and stuff. So it just makes the bass weird, is what I'm getting at. They're going to relate to cover and structure different. They're going to be very curious fish that are used to following baits for long distances, because those are really active fish. You know what I mean? They go out and investigate lures and things. And that's one thing an angler will typically run into, I think, when they go to Almanor, is those fish really inspect your baits, almost like with a, you know, like a magnifying glass, looking at right up on it, and at the last second they say no, you know, and if baits they'll say no to at Almanor, it's amazing. They're very developed baits, super realistic. Other fisheries, I mean, they eat these things all the time. But I struggled to get the fish at Almanor to eat on a consistent basis, and
so they were
you know, sometimes have to throw to 100 of them just to get one of them to bite.
They were done spawning when you were there this year, right?
You know, most of the guys in the top 10 were bed fishing. I don't want to speak on behalf of the field, but as far as I know, I was the only guy on the final day who didn't knowingly target a bed fish the whole time we were there. So definitely there was a lot of fish spawning. Obviously, a lot of guys rode that to success, but I wasn't doing that. I was significantly further off the bank.
We went there last year at the end of May. It was like a couple of weeks after you guys fished it last year. And I mean, I covered 15 miles or so in practice and found a 400-foot stretch of bank that had fish on it.
Yep.
And I mean, I'd catch one or two here and there, but to find like a consistent bite, is that kind of how it's still set up this year? I mean, I might have been catching bed fish because I caught 2 fish twice in a day and caught the same fish once on another day. So that, but one of them was in the same area. One of them wasn't quite exactly. It was in the same area, but not the same spot. So, so I was kind of curious. Is that? I mean, is that what you found there, or did you find a big area that you kind of covered?
You know, I'd say that there's definitely hotbeds of areas that have bass. You know, so I would similarly cover miles. You know, in certain stretches, I wouldn't say they don't have bass, but I'd say they just have some. You know what I mean? Like one here, one there, one here, one there. That being said, there's prime zones on Almanor that I mean, I'm not kidding. In pre-practice, I found stretches of bank that had 200 or 300 fish on it. Right, like I could see them with my eyes. You know, so they definitely have, I guess, habit to group up in large quantities. But that's kind of reminiscent of staging fish. You know, if you really pay attention to some of these zones and how they end up moving up in fisheries that freeze, right? So Almanor freezes like a lot of the lakes here in Oregon. So I'm super familiar with fisheries that end up being under ice for 5 or 6 months of the year. Where those fish winter at, a lot of times is a common zone. Where they move up to initially to stage, a lot of times is still a common zone. They move up in big waves, right? It's similar to what guys kind of would depict in the Northeast. In California and out west, we don't talk about this stuff much, but I'm really fortunate living where I do because I have fisheries that are 1,500 feet elevation right by my house, and I have fisheries that are 5,000 feet elevation right by my house. So, you know, that's something I do notice is those bass, when they move up in big waves. I mean, I guess the closest parallel to draw would be Clear Lake, right? We all know that the mouth of some of those creeks, all of a sudden, they're just there one day, and there's thousands of them all together, right? Trying to understand the inner workings of their migration. It's like we might not ever really get to the bottom of the hows and the whys, but that is something I did run into at Almanor. So I had a feeling I would be around areas that were pretty laden with fish.
Yeah, it was funny because there was a stretch that I had fished, and there. It was a rocky bank and went into the cove, and there was a dock that came out. And there's 2 guys fishing a team tournament on the other side. And, you know, they caught like maybe one towards the back of the area I was in. But once you got on the other side and that stretch of bank leading there, I mean, it was just loaded. They just kind of sat there and looked at me like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, what are we doing wrong? It was a spot in a spot type of thing, you know?
Yeah, Almanor is a technical fishery, you know, which is surprising. Usually the higher elevation you go to fish for bass, they're not that hard to catch. But man, Almanor fish just really pose a challenge to anglers. And I think the main thing is they're eating a forage that is so specific. You know, if you've never held a pond smelt in your hand, you're going to realize that you don't own a lot of lures that are a good pond smelt imitation, right? So you think like a 3-inch easy shiner is about the perfect match, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard, you know, and all of a sudden one day they're not eating a 3-inch easy shiner and you're like, well, what do I use? And every jerkbait you own is going to be 2 times too big. You
Yeah.
know? So it
I
just,
ended up getting on it was a free rig bite with a fatty Z. And,
yeah.
what was that color? Watermelon candy.
Yep.
And that's what I mean. That was the only thing I got bit on. A couple things here and there, a little 2.8, but dude, that little fatty Z up there was I don't know what was about it on that free rig last year.
Yeah, smallmouth is a species. If there's a presence of crayfish, you're always going to feed on crayfish too. You know, so in the course of the event, I probably weighed in 4 key fish that were on craw imitation lures. So kind of similar to a fatty Z. That wasn't necessarily what I was using, but I did have key fish. In fact, the winning fish, the one that ended up putting me over on the final day, was on a craw imitation soft plastic. So
Nice.
if anyone's fishing around smallmouth bass, they might primarily be feeding on shad, trout, kokanee, in this case pond smelt. But always make sure you're rotating some crayfish imitations in there because a smallmouth is a smallmouth is a smallmouth, and they will not turn down a crayfish if presented correctly, you know.
Yeah.
For sure. So what were your winning baits, if you want to kind of and techniques you were using? I don't let's say baits, but techniques.
Yeah, for sure. So the minnow I was using, I probably caught 60% or 70% of the total fish that I either put as scorables or weighed into the event. And it's a minnow, like you can't even get it. Like I pretty much have to make them at home. It's a mix of some baits I've kind of like cut up and pour, you know, and then I have to nail weight it and get the paint just right and things. And really me getting onto that bite is something that I had to kind of like craft out of necessity, because the times I've been to Almanor, I have been successful in the past, but I wasn't as successful as I knew I could be. I knew there was a missing link, right? So I kind of have spent the last couple of years figuring out how to better target smelt eaters, how to better target some of these smallmouth I couldn't catch, getting better with live scope and other technologies and things. As far as the crayfish imitations were, I was throwing a 5/64 ounce tungsten ball head, so micro. I'm probably a size 3 or 4 hook, and I was using a couple different really, really tiny finesse crayfish. If you go to Almanor, you'll notice that those fish have actually adapted to the fishery. And a smallmouth has a small mouth to start with, but anybody who's fished Almanor will tell you the smallmouth in Almanor have even smaller mouths than smallmouth you catch other places, you know.
Interesting.
So if you catch an 18-inch smallmouth on the Columbia River, I mean, that thing is adapted to eat threadfin shad and perch and big crawdads and whatever, you know. 18-inch smallmouth on the Columbia probably weighs 2.5, 2 3/4, maybe 3 pounds if it was fat, and its mouth is going to be like the size of a Coke can. When you go to Almanor and catch an 18-incher, it's probably close to 4 pounds, and its mouth is like micro in the same comparison. So, you know, it's funny, and that's all stuff I pick up on, just paying really close attention to kind of like just nature and how everything's kind of evolved and set up, you know. So I was using really small crayfish imitations. I used a 2.5-inch tube. I used some small hula grubs, like 4-inch hula grubs, you know what I mean, and a couple other little tiny craw baits to pretty much catch those fish. And I had to be really meticulous, and I had to let them find it, and they had to come over and pick it up at their own will. It wasn't like a dragging along. There was no reaction bite. You had to identify the zone they were in and let it sit there and let them come find it. And that's a really common strategy to apply for big smallmouth. They know what's going on, man. They're visual feeders. They're very aware of their surroundings. You know, I'm writing an article right now for Bass Angler Magazine on catching big smallmouth, and I would recommend everybody who's interested definitely pick up the fall issue of the magazine, because I'm going to drop some of my best tips I've ever found in my life, and I spend more time fishing for big smallmouth than almost anybody I know. You know?
So how long were you dead sticking these baits? Like reality? Like, was it just you sit out, you eat your sandwich, you're like, oh, there's a bite finally?
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually was running a GoPro during the event, at least on the final day quite a bit, and numerous fish that ended up eating that crayfish imitation were on casts that were 7 or 8 minutes long. So I had to cut the footage up in order to get it to Thomas to get the edit and stuff for the show. The fish that I won the tournament with, my kicker on the final day was probably a 4-pounder, and to catch that fish, I saw them milling around the area on live scope, and I broke off 6 or 7 casts in a row before getting that fish to bite consecutively. So I cast out there and drag and just barely move it and let it kind of marinate in there, acting like a real crawdad, and then snag, break off. I'm not even kidding you. I saw the winning fish on live scope, and I said, if I don't catch that fish, I will not win this tournament. And I waited it out, and it bit at 1:53 p.m. in a 2:30 check-in. So,
Wow.
you know, I was going really slow, and I really was able to utilize all the techniques I found out about catching smallmouth in my life for this tournament. I mean, I've never felt so comfortable in an event. Martinez was awesome. I got to exhibit skills on the fly and, you know, make adjustments, and that's wonderful. And I got super fortunate. I got a little bit lucky. You know what I mean? I mean, I'll be the first one to admit that. There's some luck involved, but Almanor, I just got to do my thing, and it was the best. You know, I really had a blast.
Yeah, Almanor, that rock there is super sticky. I can't tell you how many weights and hooks I donated throwing that free rig out there. I mean, that was nonsense, dude. You'd be drag. Oh, there we go. Well, I'm gonna break that one off again, tie on again. I got to the point to where I was breaking off so bad I was running out of baits, and I think John gave me a pack, and Damien ended up giving me a couple packs. The guys were like, "Here, dude, take it," you know. And after, you know, had a good day one, and looking, it's still panned out, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I had a real conversation with myself on the water. Like, I know this is the winning school fish. I know that the winning fish is there, and I'll break off every jig head in my boat to catch it, you know, type thing. That was a real, I mean, I'm not kidding. 6 or 7 casts in a row consecutively. I broke off a bait and had to sit down and retie the same bait until I pretty much was running out myself. And yeah, but it worked, you know.
Yeah.
So what did you think
are
that,
some of these, if you
that
don't mind
made that area so good?
So what made the area so good is it was a definitive point. It didn't appear to be a point visually. So by the 3rd day of the tournament, I don't think that it was really, really pressured. And if it was, the fish that were on it were super hard to catch. So the first day I went to that spot, I was unable to get one to bite. Second day I went to that spot, I actually hooked a big one and lost it. So I knew that the right caliber of fish were there. So on the final day, I pulled in there at about probably 1. And a few minutes into it, saw a fish on my Garmin, and I casted to 80. The lures I were using were so small I could only cast them 80 feet. And for me, that's a relatively short cast because I use way lighter gear than most guys do, way lighter line than most guys do. I was using 4-pound line, and I mean, I've fished my whole life. I can just cast really little baits really far. I mean, I've had co-anglers call me and say, "Hey, how are you doing that?" You know, after they call me, they say, "What's different about this or that?" And it's just all my gear is really fine-tuned to achieve that goal. But these things were so small, I could only cast them 80 feet. So I flick it out there, see a fish at 40, burn it up to it, drop it, you know, hover it right over its head, bites, catch that fish. And another one, the one I landed was probably a 3.5, 3 3/4, and it had about a 4-pounder with it. Whether the fish that I caught a little bit later was the same fish, I'm not sure, but I got the feeling there was a small wolf pack of smallmouth using that area. So every fish on that spot was a key sized fish in that event. I mean, obviously the biggest bag of the event was 1652, I think is what I had the final day. And there was a few other 16-pound bags. So anything 4 pounds in that event was pretty much pure gold, you know, especially a smallmouth event. So once I identified there was winning fish there, that was the deal. I think it was to answer your question, clearly it was a mix of, it was overlooked by a lot of competition. If it wasn't overlooked, the fish were extremely conditioned and hard to catch, just at their own will. I think they were just bigger fish that were a little bit more wise. And then, you know, it's kind of subliminal. It wasn't something that you look on a map and say, ooh, look at this. You know what I mean? And that's what I kind of always try to look for. So that was the catalyst, I guess.
Yeah. So what is one of these smallmouth techniques you know? That article there.
I heard a little bit of that question. Can you repeat it?
Oh, some of your smallmouth techniques you're talking about. You want to share one of those with us?
Yeah, of course. So generally, when someone is targeting smallmouth specifically, I think to understand, your prey, essentially, you need to think like them. So smallmouth have adapted from the rivers of the Northeast United States. So they're kind of a river fish, which means they're probably generally a little bit more active than largemouth. So they're sportier, right? They have bigger, broader tails. They're leaner. They're known for being hard fighters and things of that nature. They're very visual. They love to swim. I don't think that a smallmouth has you get a largemouth to move. If you can get a largemouth to move 10 or 20, 30 feet, it's probably going to commit just because it doesn't like moving that much, right?
Mhm.
Very rare we get a big largemouth follow all the way to the boat, sometimes. Smallmouth, we see them every couple casts if we're on a smallmouth fishery where they're really active. So first thing to identify is they don't mind moving. They're kind of genetically predispositioned to live in rivers and things of that nature. They have super keen eyesight. And they're pretty speedy and sporty fish, but they're also really damn aggressive, right? Smallmouth like to chase stuff. They're like a cat and a laser pointer. You play with the cat in your living room, they're going to chase that laser pointer. So the techniques that I find most success with smallmouth a lot of times, big ones, big smallmouth, are techniques where I can balance curiosity, speed, and movement in order to get them to commit, right? There's things they eat day in and day out. They eat crawdads all the time. They eat baitfish all the time, right? But some of my best smallmouth lures are kind of off the wall crazy things. An example of that would be like a bone white glide bait, right? They see it from a long ways and they think, what's that? I got to see what it is. And you make them move a long ways. And all of a sudden they're interacting with this bait and they're on it and it darts a different way. And then they get frustrated and angry and slip up and make a mistake. The thing you'll find about giant smallmouth, guys don't hardly ever catch these things, right? There's 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 pound smallmouth that exist, but who do you know that hardly ever catches one? A buddy once a year, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like you have to figure out ways that you can manipulate them and then inherently get them to eat. So like an example of how you could do that aside from baits would be like fishing uphill, right? If you are fishing a point and you cast out to deep water and you fish it uphill, that smallmouth follows it probably from like a mid-water column. And the shallower that smallmouth gets up on that point, it's going to realize like it's running out of resources. And the resource in that circumstance is going to be the water. So I get a lot of huge smallmouth to bite just because I'm forcing them to go from 12 feet to 8 feet to 6 feet to 4 feet. And finally they make a haphazard, hasty bite at the last minute. That's why I hook a lot of smallmouth and they throw my bait. I'm putting a hook in them and I have a chance to land them. These things are very technical to catch. So techniques for targeting smallmouth, especially big ones, are more so geared towards understanding how they act and behave and trying to use it against them. You're using their speed, you're using their curiosity, you're using their keen eyesight in order to try to get them to bite. And a lot of times when they bite, they're not going to choke it. They're going to come up and just peck it. You're going to hook them in the side of the lip and you're just going to hold on for dear life and pray they stay on, Another thing too is that you can manipulate their speed because they're super fast, but they're not that fast, right? So a lot of times I'll catch bonus smallmouth because I crank on an 8.5 to 1. And I'll throw a bait out there and I'll literally reel an 8.5 to 1 reel with like 8 or 10 pound fluorocarbon, and I will crank smallmouth, and it's the craziest thing you've ever seen if you've never been conditioned to it. You're seeing me burning, picking up 36 or 40 inches per crank, and I'm cranking as fast as I humanly can. And, you almost just try to get it right in their strike zone, and they reach out and strike, just like that cat chasing a laser pointer, right? Yeah. So the techniques, it's almost funny, they're not exactly techniques. They're just little spins and approaches to, present your lure in a fashion to actually make the smallmouth bite instead of just trying to feed them all the time. You know what I mean? I think that's where a lot of guys go wrong. You pitch a Cinco to a largemouth that says, what's that? It looks tasty, and eats it. Okay, cool. I don't find smallmouth doing that often, where it's more like, can I use their habits against them to make them bite in conditions they don't really otherwise want to? And that's how I found success as a smallmouth angler.
Nice. So Bray, our tournament director for BAM, it gave me the blessing. I could ask you some information on the comment here. It says, I bet you've got some insight on catching big uns in Trinity. So,
yeah.
If you don't mind sharing a tip or two for Trinity, Bray gave me the okay, so I'm going to blame him if I get in trouble for it.
Yeah. So first of all, congrats to all of you because you get to go there, and it's one of the best fisheries, in California. It'll likely be fishing tougher than what you've experienced in the past, at least in terms of big size. Trinity was kind of known for 28 to 34, 35 pound bags in events, pretty consistently through 2020, 2021, 2022, and it definitely is fishing a little bit tougher. Why that is, I'm not really sure. Probably prolonged low water years. Guys that are going to show up there in the next few days, I don't know when your guys' event is, but it sounds like it's soon. They're going to experience a different fishery. The lake's up. I haven't checked it in a while. I know they dropped in the spring for some boat races and things, but the last time I looked, it was like 20 or 30 feet down or something, which is going to present a totally different playing field. Those fish in Trinity definitely move in what I would say are like migratory packs. So if I was going to give someone a tip on fishing that fishery, it's if you're not getting bit, you need to move. Whether it's a mile, whether it's 100 yards, so on and so forth. Secondary tip would be you need to be utilizing your electronics. You don't have to live scope every fish, right? But you do need to be paying attention. And by paying attention, I mean you maybe need to take note of where the kokanee are in the water column. You may need to take note of how they're moving around certain creek channels or certain stretches of bank, right? You obviously need to keep note to see if you're going to run into any bass. When I'm down there and I find singles, they might be some big ones, but that doesn't really, get my gears turning. When I go down there, I'm really looking for schools of fish. I'm looking for big wolf packs of fish. And I'd say consistently the biggest schools of bass I've found on that lake over the last 5 years, I find them in June and July and through the summer. So whoever's going to win the event, if they're on the right fish, they're probably going to be on like 100 of them, type of deal. So they definitely group up. They group up very specifically and strategically in accordance with where they just were, which was likely large spawning flats. And they're going to go find somewhere that they can run into that forage, which in that fishery, it is kokanee. There's trout there. They eat them, I'm sure. There's other different types of panfish, and there's even some catfish in there, but they're so geared towards kokanee, similar to how the Almanor smallmouth are geared towards smelt, that if someone overlooks the fact that that's what their main forage base is, they probably are halting themselves from winning. Not to say big ones don't eat plastics, because they do, but it's important to make the distinction of just because you caught it on a Cinco doesn't mean that that fish doesn't spend 365 days of its life eating 8-inch silverfish, because the lake's loaded. So, there's some tributaries. Definitely don't overlook the tributaries. Not to say that I go way up into moving water particularly, but in reservoirs, I think anglers will find success identifying tributaries and main creek channels is almost like an umbilical cord. That is the nutrient delivery system in the fishery. Anytime you're fishing reservoirs, especially for fish like kokanee or shad or alewives or cisco that feed on microorganisms and algae, the main creek channel is going to be the hub of that bait fish's diet, because it's going to have the most current and it's going to push all that algae to certain areas of the lake. The only thing that's ever going to change the flow of that main creek channel is the wind, right? So hopefully you guys pulled some nuggets out of there. That's pretty much what I do, and it's hard to figure it out, but once you get the recipe developed, you will really produce on reservoirs and especially on Trinity.
Yeah. Nice. Any other questions, John? I know you got something burning.
Yeah. So where's your next BAM event at?
Yeah. So I'm going to fish the Pro-Am, which is going to be like next week up on the Columbia River. It's out of Boardman, Oregon. Super excited about that. And I'm kind of using that event as practice for the BAM Pro Tour event that's going to be there at the end of July. So luckily, we have a Pro-Am event right before our cutoff. So I get to go up there, get into a competition, have fun, hang out with a bunch of my friends. And then the next month, we have the Pro Tour event, which is out of the same pool. So I'm going to use it as practice to get up there. And I love fishing the Columbia River.
I'm jealous.
So how are you going to attack in order to find those fish at the Columbia River?
So I don't have much experience up there in June, but the further north you go, obviously the further behind the fish are going to be in terms of like their cyclical ways, so they're probably going to be some largemouth still spawning. Smallmouth should be done, and there's probably going to be some smallmouth that are really into a post-spawn pattern, which is probably going to put them more in conjunction with that current, where they would swim up into some like backwaters and bays to spawn. There should be some fish back in the main current too. So pretty much I'm just going to start checking off boxes. The first thing I'm going to do is see if there's any sort of topwater bite. I'm going to get in some of that moving water, see if I can run into any, I guess, groups of fish, big groups of fish, you know, something I can kind of coast on. And then other than that, I'm just going to expand depending on how good I can catch the smallmouth. Like if I feel really confident I can catch 15 to 17, 18 pounds a day in smallmouth, I'll probably spend a little bit of time practicing, looking for maybe how I could catch a big largemouth. The Columbia is not a super strong largemouth fishery outside of the early spring. So I'm not going to put all my eggs in that basket by any means. But I will, if I'm doing well enough catching smallmouth, look for some areas I might be able to spend an hour or two a day to maybe catch a kicker largemouth. If a guy could do that a day or two of the event, 3 days of the event, he probably would have a shot at winning it. So that's kind of how I'm going to break that one down.
So to target the largemouth on the Columbia River, you would go off the main channel, get into some oxbows and tributaries and look for grass, or how would you look for the largemouth?
Yeah, so just by time of year, I would get off the main creek channel and go into some more inaccessible, you know, kind of like further back areas that are devoid of current particularly. Later in the year, late summer and fall, those largemouth move right out there into that main channel, just like with the smallmouth. And then the Columbia is loaded with grass. I think a lot of guys have the idea that maybe the Columbia is just free flowing and all rock and stuff, and it has a lot of rock, and you got to be careful running it, but it's full of grass. When we have tournaments up there in the summertime, especially into like August, the middle of the river will literally have giant combed over grass beds that are flowing in the current. So it's a really interesting place to fish. Because like you have to rig a lot of your baits weedless, and it's not where you typically would fish for smallmouth, but it's such a bountiful river, so nutrient dense and so healthy. It's like the most epic bass fishery, I think, honestly, on the West Coast. Like Clear Lake's amazing and the Delta's amazing. We have Havasu and Mojave and all these fisheries that are so cool. But man, the Columbia is just, it's a whole new beast, you know, so it's really exciting place to fish.
So with the wind factor, so every year my brother lives in Washington on Camas, which is right next to the Columbia River, and we head up to the gorge. And every time we go to the gorge, I look and I'm like, wow, that looks pretty rough out there. So, I mean, if the wind's blowing hard, you still going to make those long runs if you find fish long ways away, or?
Yeah, I won't, you know what I mean? If the wind's blowing, say anything, I start to make good decisions when the wind's blowing over 10 miles an hour on the Columbia River. And I know guys will hear that and say, well, 10's not that much. Well, 10, if you have a straight shot for 40 miles through a canyon, is a lot. Yeah. We fished an event with Apex there in 2021, and it was probably blowing in the upper teens. And we were driving over 6-foot waves for probably 40 miles, right? 30 miles, most of us. So you just have to make good decisions. You have to play it safe. Do not put yourself in danger. Don't put your equipment in danger. Don't dare put a co-angler in danger. You know what I mean? So I'll make good decisions in that aspect. You know, I always err on the side of caution. I'll look for some water that's a mile or two from the ramp in case I get stuck and have to fish that, you know? So if it's blowing 8 to 12, 14, you know, I'll make the right decision to go where I need to go. You know what I mean? But if it's much more than that, no, I won't do it, you know? So the wind is a huge factor. I know it's probably one of the windiest places, I mean, maybe in the country. It's the Columbia River will eat you alive if you let it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how rough it gets there. It's a gorge and it squeezes down and the wind just starts moving faster and faster, and that water's going one way and the wind's blowing the other way. And those waves just lift up, and yeah, it looks pretty gnarly out there. Now there's locks. Do you actually lock up to another section, or do you stay in the one section? Yeah, so locking takes a lot of time. In a Pro-Am event or a Pro Tour event in the past, I've never locked. I've never been in the lock in my life. But it might be something I consider for this next event just to see. And the only reason that that's the case is because I'm more familiar with Lake Wallula, which is outside of like Tri-Cities and things. I fish more events there, you know, but
honestly, from what I understand, usually when we fish those events out of Lake Wallula, guys run 60 miles downstream and fish Boardman. So I probably just need to stay in Boardman, because if it's that desirable, the guys are going to run 50, 60 miles to get there. There's probably something to that, and I'll probably just try to chill out and fish right around the, plus or minus 10 miles from where we take off.
Right.
Nice. So
That's pretty.
Okay, John.
Go ahead. It's pretty crazy to go 50 or 60 miles. So especially on that river, I mean, if it gets rough, you get 4-footers, and you went 50 or 60 miles, you're going 40 miles an hour, maybe 30 to 40, all the way back.
Yeah,
And
pretty much.
you're just beating, you're knocking your teeth out all the way there and back.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a big factor. It's just like a kayak, it only goes 4 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
So if you go 5 miles, you sat there for a whole hour, not doing nothing but eating a sandwich and drinking water, where you should be fishing. So, yeah.
Yeah, you go 40 or 50 miles in big waves, you're going to feel like your kidneys got ripped out the next day. So,
Exactly.
fishing the Columbia, and I don't fish there a ton, but when I do, is the only reason I went with a 21-foot 6-inch Phoenix. Like,
Right.
that's the number one reason. I like 19-foot boats. I like 20-foot boats. I would have never gone with a full size, biggest you can get boat. But the Columbia River specifically is why I went with the 921 Phoenix.
Right. Very good.
So
Those are nice boats.
you got your 2 wins. You're starting the season off with a bang. What's your goal now for the season? You trying to go AOI,
I definitely want to lock up Angler of the Year.
Win 'em all.
That's a primary goal for me, is to get Angler of the Year. It means a lot. I've always prided myself in consistency. Before winning these events, I just wanted to fish every Sunday that I could. So every time the opportunity arose and I could sneak my way in there, that was always my goal. I knew if I flirted with a victory enough times, I would get them. So it's awesome, especially to have had it happen back to back. So my short-term goal, Angler of the Year, you know what I mean? I'm really looking forward to the direction that this circuit's going. I'm really looking forward to what they're bringing to the table, next year when we grow. It's going to essentially provide me the opportunity to fish for my salary. I still work full time. I've been really lucky and fortunate to have this fishing thing kind of start working out the last few years, where it's definitely a viable source of income for me. And between marketing and sponsorship, endorsements, supports, and, at the end of the day, I put my boots to the ground. I'm really active on social media. I'm really active, podcasts, interviews such as this. I'm active in trade shows. Any opportunity that I can help one of my sponsors or my own brand out, I always do. So long-term goal is definitely to fish. I want to fish nationally. I want to fish full-time. I don't come from a lot of resources. I mean, my first Pro-Am, I fished in a 1997 Skeeter, and I had to borrow all my gear. I pretty much hawked all my stuff to stay alive and pay my bills, and scrapped. And at one point in time, I was living in a guy's basement. Like, I don't have money. I didn't come from money, none of that stuff. So I'm just chipping away, climbing the ladder. I want to go fish nationally as a touring pro, the Elite Series, something like that. That's where my goals are. So, for me, short term, I'm trying to buy myself off the West Coast. So hopefully I can keep winning and get some good support and go chase that dream, man. That would be the ultimate goal.
So you should, come down to get yourself a little plastic boat. Come down to Trinity this weekend.
I have
get a little extra spending money.
You guys don't understand. Every time you've gone to Trinity, I have contemplated doing that. I just love that lake, and I spend a lot of time there.
There's a shop right there in Redding called Headwaters. I'm sure Bray and Brian will hook you up.
Yeah,
get you set up, ready to go.
Maybe someday I'll jump into one of those things, man. I probably would struggle to stay inside the boat though. So,
dude, I'm not a little guy, and I can stay in there. I've almost fallen in a few times, but
and I'm bigger than him, and I have no problem standing in my kayak.
You'll be all right, bud.
So when are you going to go back east and fish the opens?
I would be willing to go fish the opens as soon as next year if I could get the support to do so. You know what I mean?
Right.
For me, I look at something like that as I'd have to have my work salary in my bank account before I could go. you know.
Sure.
So I've kind of been trying to save my money and trying to make myself more marketable and work on some partnerships and things like that. As soon as the opportunity presents itself financially for me to make a rational decision, a business decision to go do that, I will do that. So yeah, if I could do it next year, if I can keep finding success and get some partners on board and work hard for them and they're pleased with that, then by all means, it could be soon. But, you know, forecasting that, it's hard to say. I'm focused on the next event, you know, and I know if I win the next one, I'm going to be in better shape than I am now. And if I can win the one after that, then even more so, you know what I mean? So this year I got a couple more Pro Tour events. I got a Pro-Am, I got some Opens, I got the US Open. That's what I'm focused on right now. And then, you know, let the cards fall where they may. I pretty much just put every ounce of effort and focus that I have on this and just trust that the process will take care of me. You know what I mean? So soon, I hope.
Yeah. So
right,
speaking
good.
of sponsorships and everybody, you got anybody you want to thank?
Yeah, of course. You know, first and foremost, I want to thank Wood Brothers Carpet and Flooring, premier carpet and flooring dealer based out of Chico, California. So if you're around Chico, they definitely have like a market around there that they can cater to you and give them the opportunity for your business. First of all, they're a family-owned company. It's not a giant retail chain. You know what I mean? It's just, you know, the owner and the employees that work there, they're from the community. They support the community. They support bass fishing, most importantly. So if you're a bass angler and you need to do a remodel, it's time for some new floors in your house. You got to give those guys a ring because at the end of the day, they're going to take some of the earnings that they're going to get as their business and they're going to reinvest it in the community. You know what I mean? Whether it's the community around Northern California and Chico and the individuals there, or whether it's anglers or the pro circuit, the BAM trail, you know, they've always supported us for a long time, you know, and that to me, that means a lot. I purposely try to align with companies to support the circuits that I'm fishing. Phoenix boats, like I mentioned, I run a Phoenix 921. I got that boat. It's a 2023, so spring 2023. I broke it in during the Western Shootout. I've never had an issue with my boat. Phenomenal. Keeps me safe on the water. Keeps my back and kidneys where they belong. You know, I don't hurt, you know, and things like that. So phenomenal. Next up, I really need to thank Garmin. They do a lot to support me, and I do a lot of my fishing with their technology, whether it's using, you know, their different mapping chips to get relief shading and some really high detailed maps. I use the Active Captain app on my phone to do some map study when I'm not in my boat. I have two 126 Echo maps on the front, and I have two 106s on the console. I have a LVS 34 in perspective mode, a LVS 34 in standard forward sight mode. I have the Garmin trolling motor. So all that stuff works phenomenal. I haven't had any glitches with any of my equipment. It's always performed when I've needed it to perform, right? So that's massive. Need to thank iRod. Pretty much every fish that I weighed in and scored in Almanor was on the G2 Finesse, which is like a 7.4 light action rod. It's one of the only rods on the market that you can really fish that 4-pound line that I was telling you guys about on. So it's super critical to run that really light rod. So iRod definitely an integral point to my performance. Need to thank Shimano for bait casters. If anybody was wondering, I run Metaniums. I actually run quite a few different year models. I like to run a 2016 Metanium is my favorite reel. As far as their spinning reels, everything from, you know, Vanfords and Stellas, all that stuff, really, really phenomenal. So give them a chance. Shout out to Cortland Fishing Line. I use their fishing line, their Master Braid. I use everything from 80 all the way down to 5. Their 5-pound braid's epic. It helps me fish those really finesse baits. Fish a lot of 10-pound braid on my spinning gear. That's why I was using at Martinez and caught, you know, some of my winning fish on that setup as well. Woo Tungsten, I changed a lot of my baits. I spend a lot of time throwing them in my pond in my front yard, getting them the action just right. So I use a lot of nail weights. Plus I love throwing a Nico rig. So give Woo Tungsten a shot for nail weights, you know, punching weights, flipping weights, the whole nine, right? So that stuff's super duper important. Discount Tackle, just partnered up with them this year. That's the premier tackle dealer in like the Northwest. And I think guys outside of the region should give them a shot. If there's something, you know, I know you guys are hooked up with Hook Tackle, and they've done a lot to support us too, so check them out for that matter. But if they don't have something or you need something shipped to a location, Discount Tackle will probably be able to get you your order out west in probably 48 hours. maybe 3 days at the most. They have a really good selection. The interface on their website is really easy to navigate, and they sponsor not only ABA events, but a lot of Bass Nation events and things like that, especially in my region. So I always try to make sure that those guys are taken care of. I support Discount Tackle, and I hope other people will too. I want to thank Loophole Optics. I wear the Vecnara is my favorite frame, so definitely check them out. And then, I'm sure I'm forgetting some people, but I promise if I did, I'll get back to you guys at some point in time. Appreciate everybody. Need them on board supporting me because, they really are what keep the wheels on the bus. So thanks to all those partners.
It's hard to do what we do without the support and community behind us. That's for sure.
True that.
Well, Colby, I appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck on the next one.
Thank you very much, Colby.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate you guys. I'd love to come back anytime. Hopefully I can win another one in the future and we get the chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
Get that third trophy. We will have you back on, man.
He don't have room in the screen to fit it in there. He'd be standing up behind it.
I'll just put it like back,
Yeah.
Or I could put it like between the two and I could crouch.
Yeah, right.
So there's room. There's always room.
Yeah, you gave up a lot of great information too. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to all the Trinity smallmouth nuggets before this weekend.
Sweet. Well, all right, guys. I appreciate it.
All right.
Guys,
thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you out there on the water.
Thanks, Colby.
Good luck at
Have
your
a good
next
evening,
tournament.
bud.
Thanks. See you guys.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, guys, let's do this giveaway. I don't like that screen. There we go. That's better. All right. Yak Attack, Omega Rod Holder. Give me a hashtag. Let's go hashtag Headwaters since Brian's donating it. Drop it in the comments. And we'll pick a winner. If somebody wants it. Anybody?
Looks like there's 2 people.
There's more than that.
Is there more?
Yeah.
There
There we got one.
What's up, Drew?
Oh. All right. Well, anyway, John, congrats. Second place New Moonies last weekend.
Thanks, man.
Guys, don't forget, we got Trinity this weekend for BAM. Next weekend, Clear Lake for bass.
Yep.
Sign-ups are still open till the 20. I should know this.
21st.
21st. Thanks, Shane.
I knew you had me on here for some reason.
I know. Hashtag Headwaters. Anybody else? If not, this guy's getting it. I don't want to butcher his name. You know him, John?
Yeah, Drew.
Drew.
I don't know. Maybe if I look at his profile, but all right. Well, you're gonna get the Omega.
Drew.
Huh?
You know Drew. Everybody knows Drew.
You know Drew.
I guess so. Apparently, I do. Hey, bud, reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram. I'll get your over to Brian.
You're gonna be at Clear Lake, right, Drew?
Well, I gotta get it from Brian.
Drew
Brian
will
send
be
it out.
there.
He'll send it out to you. Just hit me up on one of these things. Or email me at croco.outdoors@gmail.com, and we'll get it all sent over to Brian.
Drew will be there.
So, guys, thanks for watching. Next week, the one and only Damien Tao is going to join the podcast again.
Hey, when I make the spread for it for social media, should I put a big old like Burger King crown on him?
You should put a crown. I don't know. You should do something.
Do that, dude.
Fish Whisper.
Definitely the Fish Whisperer.
Yeah.
He needs to come up with his own
Yep. All right, y'all. We'll catch y'all next week.
All right, thanks, fellas.
Good night, everybody.